I'm Laurie Zion. Very happy to be the outsourcer of Michael's normal gig today. Shortly I'm going to introduce the three people on my left. Just want to say a little bit about the New Beats project that is connected to this lunch today. And a few years ago I was having lunch in town in 2012 with a former student of mine, Tom Cowie, who's now at the Age. And it was the day, I think, that Fairfax announced, I think, something like 1,900 redundancies. And Tom had just started his first job at Crikey. And so, of course, this was the topic of lunch. And he said, you know, you're at uni, Laurie, I reckon there'd be a good PhD in this. And I said, well, Tom, I've already got a PhD. And he said, no, I mean, you know, for a student. And I said, well, actually, I think there's a lot more to this. I think what's happening now is going to take years and years and years. The repercussions are going to shake out for years. And I wasn't thinking then about there being more and more redundancies over time. I was really just thinking about, you know, the aftermath of all these jobs being lost and what it would be like over time to see what happened to all these journalists. And even though the names weren't announced, I knew, and there are some of you are here, that a lot of the people would be people I'd worked with at the Age. And so we talked about this at lunch, and I kind of thought if I was going to be able to be part of any study about what happened to all these people who are about to become redundant, I would really like to be able to look at something over time and not do just a snapshot. And so really from there I started talking to a few colleagues from my university and other universities, and a few of us ended up deciding we'd put in for Research Council grants, which we did, and luckily we were successful. But before we did that, we did a pilot study in 2013 where we thought about the themes that we'd want to look at over a 3 to 5 year period. And I suppose we're trying to prove the concept that this was a study that where we would look at what happened to the careers of people over time, because it struck me that with all that talent walking out the door, a lot of people were going to be doing really interesting things whether or not they stayed in journalism. So that was really the birth of the New Beats project. And I guess in looking at the individual case studies, we also wanted to look more broadly at what the consequences of this huge change were going to be for journalism itself over time. And more broadly for, you know, what does this tell us, this episode that unfortunately continues to unravel? What does this really tell us about working life in the 21st century? So that was really the start of it. And my research team aren't here today, or some of them are actually over on that table there, but Penny O'Donnell at Sydney Uni, Matthew Ricketson at University of Canberra, Andrew Dodd at Swinburne, Tim Marchbanks at La Trobe Uni, and Mark Deuser, who's Professor of Media at University of Amsterdam. And he's just joined our team, and the studies that we're doing here in Australia are going to be mirrored in Holland over the next few years. So what we've done so far is we did our pilot survey. We did a survey last year of people who took a package in either 2012, 13 or 14. We've got 3 partners with our project: the ABC, the MEAA and the National Library of Australia. The MEAA have been hugely helpful in helping us find people to be part of our surveys, and the National Library have partnered with us to do a collection of 60 whole-of-life interviews, they call them, as a kind of a snapshot of journalism in Australia in the 21st century at this huge period of change. And so over the next 3 years, and these interviews are going to be 6-hour interviews going through the whole lives of journalists who are from our group as well. So that's just a kind of overview. I'm happy later on in questions and discussion to talk about findings we've had so far from our project. But with three great people up here to my left, I want to introduce them and perhaps look at where they started and then look at what they're doing now and the experience that they've been through, and obviously to invite participation from everyone in the room as well. So at my far left, Louise Graham. Louise started her career as a photographer at the Herald, as it was then, 1979, moved to the Sunday Age a decade later as picture editor, and held a number of roles at the Sunday Age and the Age until 2009. And I think you were editorial operations manager the last few years there. These days, she's director and founder, as Michael said, of the Media Gang and a director of Media Express. So that's Louise. In the middle, Kirsty Simpson followed a BA at Monash by joining the Herald Sun as a cadet in 1992 and soon joined that paper's Canberra team. She moved to the Age in 1997 and worked in a number of business reporting roles and editing roles before taking on the role of media editor in 2012 for the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. And that, as it happened, was also the year she took a redundancy package. And she's now working in a range of different roles, including as a freelance journalist and editor. And Phil Kafkaludi's immediately to my left. He began his career working for Singo's program and I think for Ida Buttrose on 2KY in 1983. And then in 88, the same year I started at the ABC, Phil also began a career that lasted a lot longer than mine in the ABC, 26 years, during which time he worked in the radio newsroom as a court reporter and then in a number of roles before taking on the gig as breakfast host of Breakfast on Radio Australia, which he held for 9 years. For his sins, he's been working actually with me at La Trobe this year, galvanising final year students into the art and craft of broadcast journalism. So big welcome to the panel. And I'm going to go and ask you all this, but starting with Louise, because 2009 is when you took a redundancy package, which is a little bit ahead of the group that we're investigating. But tell us a bit about how redundancy loomed for you and what the experience was like.
Is this on? Yes. I was working at The Age at the time and as editorial operations manager. My job entailed a lot of cutting back of departments and looking at costs, and the mentality I could see was getting greater and greater in saving costs, and you know, that's very taxing on managers when you've got to tell people they don't have their jobs or their departments going to be halved next week. So after a couple of years of doing that, I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. I just thought, I can't stand this. This is something that, you know, I could see there was redundancies on offer. So I tried, in fact, in 2007 to get one. I tried 2008 and I finally got one in 2009. So I was very happy to leave. Not to leave the people, but to leave my job. And I had a great time at Fairfax, so I would never disparage that at all. But so from there, I decided I would look at creating my own business, and at that stage I was looking at a couple of things, and one of them was something in the media because that's what I knew, and the other one, you may all laugh, was home care for the elderly. So I looked at that and I probably investigated that more than I did the media side of the business and decided there was too much red tape. There's probably a lot of money to be made there because more people would just stay at home, but I decided no, that wasn't for me. And then I thought I'll do what I know best, which is media, and I could see that there was a lot of people leaving the business through redundancies and also voluntary leaving, who were great journalists, great photographers, and I thought these people will be so easy to pick up to get work if I can find the work for them. So that's how I started Media Gang, and I then, that probably is still going, but in 2013 I then could see that there was I was an opportunist again. There was a couple of good mates leaving The Age, taking redundancies, very talented people. They were sort of probably thinking this might be the last round, so I'll take my money and run. Their jobs were safe, they could have stayed there, but they decided to leave. And we started a business called Media Express, and I could see that a good marriage between Media Gang and Media Express, because Media Express was going to be end-to-end, because one of the people, Bill Farr, was the art director. We've got Ken Merrigan, who's an editor, and we've got Rod Wiedemann, who's a business manager, and we also took over a business which was Clemson Texts, and we bought that out and created this publishing business. And it's a publishing business where we employ journalists and photographers as much as we can. We try to share the love. So I've had a lot of experience having lots of coffees with journalists and some people in this room I've worked with Media Gang and Media Express. So for me, redundancy was never a downtime. I left in March and started my own business in 2009. And the interesting thing about it is, as Laurie said, that some people are doing really interesting things since they've left. One guy I spoke to who was just doing a bit of freelance on the side, but was also making organic peanut butter, and you meet these journalists who are also clever in so many ways and also have great ideas. So we do trawl, we have a lot of people come through our business who they know about us, they've taken a redundancy, and they come in and see us, and we add them to our list of people that we could possibly employ as the work comes in. But obviously we're in the same boat as everyone else. We're hunting and gathering work all the time.
That's really interesting, and one of the big themes in our study is networking and how people who've taken a package network with each other. And I want to return to that theme. Kirsty, I know you were media editor in 2012 for Fairfax, and then you must have been covering the actual process which you would become part of. Tell us a bit about that and the circumstances surrounding your own taking a package.
Okay, yes, I was covering it. I kind of did know as soon as the word came out that I probably would apply, although I took several months to think about it before I sort of talked about it out loud. When I left, I'd been in journalism for 20 years, and 15 of those at The Age. And when I started, the Herald and the Sun had merged maybe 18 months, 2 years earlier, and there was still a lot of fairly bitter, angry, old journos there who kept telling me as a cadet that it would never be as good as it was for them, and it was all, terrible what had happened. And I remember looking at them and thinking I was never, ever going to let myself be the bitter and twisted old journo in the corner. And I wanted to tell myself that I was going to leave when I still loved the job. But I knew that there would be some time in the future where I probably did turn into that person I didn't want to be. So it's always a balance, and I did leave still enjoying what I was doing, but knowing that, at 44, I wanted to try new things, and it was a good time for me to do that with a buffer of a payout. So, I think it was clear to me relatively early that timing was really good, and yes, I was close to the topic, so I knew exactly what I was going to do and how I was going to do it.
So you felt you had a lot of agency in the process of making the decision?
Yeah.
Great. And I want to return to your story and to the issue of identity, how that gets refracted through this whole process of the redundancy process. But Phil, you were not in print, and I guess from our study, and from all the media accounts, this has been overwhelmingly a print process, this shedding of jobs, perhaps until later last year, and not only the ABC but also 10 and now 7 have been shedding quite a lot of jobs. Did you imagine this process would engulf you as well, Phil, at any particular time?
I don't think there's anybody at the ABC who doesn't at one stage or another say, offer me a package, I'll take it. And when I started the ABC, Michael Rowland was a cadet. And I remember the first day, there was this guy who looks remarkably the same as he did in 1988. It's unbelievable. He's still tall. But all the way through the ABC, I never got to that stage of being the cantankerous person or frustrated or any of that, because the ABC was so good that they put me on different roles. You know, I started as court reporter and then I went to television. Some overseas work came up. There was so many different things. I could work in different networks. So I never got to the stage really where I imagined they were going to try to make me redundant. In fact, the show that I did for 9 years until September, I came up with a concept for that, and it was for me and half a producer to do this show. So I thought, it's lean, it's not going to be their value at all to get rid of this show. But then as they started cutting back on different shows, the policy of not sacking anybody from the ABC, all these presenters from these shows were put onto mine. So by the end, it started from me and half a producer. It went on to me, 2 producers, 2 reporters, a social media person and a music person. I had 7 people on a station that is really a lean station. And stupid me, I didn't see the target that created. I didn't want all these people on the show. It was great to have them, but obviously when there came time when Tony Abbott came in and the money was starting to get a bit tight, it was going to be the target. And we honestly didn't think we were going to be made redundant, because it was about the cutting of money to our television arm, Australia Network. We were radio. But then Mark Scott, there's a thing in the ABC charter that says we must broadcast television to the region. So he had to find money to broadcast television. Even though the money's gone, he had to find money. And the only place he could find money were from relatively rich shows like ours and from some of the other staff around. So by getting rid of us, they could put on a paltry 4 hours a day or something television and still do some radio. So, which is mostly Fran Kelly now. So, yeah, when we had the big meeting and the head of international called us, and normal producers are sitting around going, what's this meeting about? And she wasn't making eye contact, the head of international. That's when it sort of hit me. I thought, this isn't good. You know, having been a court reporter, when a jury comes in and they don't make eye contact with the accused, it's guilty. So she didn't make eye contact, and then she broke the news. But, you know, the reaction was really interesting, because my producer, who'd been with me from the beginning, sitting across the table, as soon as he said, we're not making any content now for Radio Australia, we are not producing our own stuff, your show won't be required anymore. My producer, I could just see under the desk going, yes. And in fact, the head of international, Lindley Marshall, started crying. And I don't think there was a single person on that table who felt like crying. It was after the hard slog of doing a show for so long, I think we were quite happy with the concept of a payout or whatever and just move on. So it was really interesting when that happened. It was actually quite happy. And I don't think anybody who's been on my team that I've seen since has been particularly unhappy about it. So it was a surprise. There wasn't the worry about it. It just happened, and we're okay.
One of the things that's really striking, though, Phil, is that when we've been going through our survey responses and looking at people's reactions to redundancy, is even a lot of people who I guess, you know, had reasonably good experiences with the redundancy process in relative terms, are still pointing to the complexity of the feelings that enveloped them both on the day, perhaps, when they found out, and afterwards. Did you have any of that at all at any stage?
Not really, no. I think we were more worried about Lindley, that she was so upset, you know, about having to fire all these people. It was really strange. But there was anger at various times as you go through the emotions, the grief emotions, and it is. You know, I see people who have just been given redundancy, and I understand, you know, and I'm going, how do you feel about this? You know, the old journalistic question. And you know, sometimes they're quite good. In fact, it was interesting. Campbell Cooney, if you excuse the language, Campbell Cooney was our Pacific correspondent, and he was released the same time we were. And I walked into the Radio Australia area, and Campbell was looking very down. He was looking at his phone, and he was very down. And I went, "Are you okay, mate?" And he looked up and went, "Fuck yeah!" He just got his figure. That's what he was looking at, you know. And someone else, Kate Arnott, who's another journo who was on ABC TV a lot, she put her hand up and went, "Yeah, fuck yeah," you know. And so it was really interesting but you do go through the grief process, and some people in the early stages, you don't know how it's going to be. For me, it was always pretty good. I think early on I was thinking, that's part of my identity is gone, you know, that I'm not going to be the person on radio, the person on TV anymore. But adjust, grow up, you know.
Kirsty, how did the identity issue play out for you?
Well, I would say I found it more confronting than that, but over a relatively short period, it was...
And you were in the epicentre, really.
Yeah. I was really excited about getting redundancy and then taking a few months off and then trying new things, all of which I did. But a couple of days after I finished work, I joined my first ever book club, and a dear friend of mine said to me, introduced me to a group of about 10 fantastic people, most of whom I hadn't met, and said, "Hi, this is Kirsty, she's on the dole." And I laughed along with everybody else, but it's kind of niggled for a while. No, I wasn't on the dole, but it was the idea that I was no longer a journalist and couldn't be introduced as such. And it took me a while to work out what the answer is. Well, who are you and what do you do? But it's all part of that process. You do miss the simplicity of being able to do that. But if I hadn't, I wouldn't have learnt so much, which I have done, and it's been very invigorating and satisfying to realise that, you know, I can be my own boss and I can work for a living and decide what I do and don't do, and there are highs and lows with that, and there's feast and famine. But the initial shock of, well, if I'm not working for a paper, then, you know, am I or am I not a journalist? And if I'm not, what am I? It took a little while to get my head around.
Louise, did you go through a grief process at all?
No, I didn't go through a grief process at all. I'm a bit different, I think. But I think I did in a way that I decided that I would take 3 months off, because I had worked and never stopped and had children in between. I thought, this is my 3 months. And I kind of nested. I did sort of clean out the house and do all this stuff, and it kept me really extremely busy. But I did find that I was, you know, dressed and up and at 'em and ready to go by 9 a.m. every morning and thinking, okay, where's my day going to go now? So I did I am one of these people who likes to be occupied all the time, but I didn't really grieve it because I made a concerted effort to stay in touch with everyone that I knew and everyone that I loved in journalism. And also, you know, I began a bit of a networking process, just making sure people knew that I wasn't working anymore. So I kind of hit the ground running a bit and haven't really stopped. But there is definitely those sort of moments when, you know, the power of working for a newspaper, that you want to get something done. You think, if I was at the Age, I'd get this done like that because I could say I was from the Age. But so you kind of miss that a bit. But I think probably the things I miss most is the dynamics of the newsroom. That stress, that you know, the anger, laughter, elation when you've got an edition out. But I do wonder whether that's there anymore. And I think that, you know, I was one of the lucky people. I started when I was 19, and I think journalism for me has been a fantastic career, and I think that was one of the things I said to people when they said, "Why did you leave?" And I said, well, because I think I've seen the best of it in that form, and I didn't want to do it that way anymore. So
it was really interesting, though, that the day after, we finished on a Wednesday, I think, and the day after I had a fight with my partner, and we never fight. We never fight. But it was really grumpy. I was sitting on the lounge, playing on the laptop, really doing nothing. And she was saying, "You're not listening to me. What are you playing on the laptop?" "I'm not playing. This is important," you know. And we were really grumbling with each other. And when I spoke to some of the other people from my team a week later, we got together, They said, wasn't Thursday a really crap day? They had all fought with their partners because after the excitement of, had worn off about we're free and, the bank account's got something in it and everything is okay. The next day was when it hit, and that was a hard day. That was the only really hard day.
It's interesting hearing your stories about actually having overall quite a positive experience, though apart from your grumpy day, immediately after. I guess one of the things that really struck me when we did the pilot survey was how many people reported being a lot less stressed than they were. And I guess that's the flip side of being in a dynamic newsroom, that you come out of it and you actually can smell the roses or go out to a cafe and actually read the paper instead of frantically try to write it. Was this your experience, though, being less stressed, or were you worried about just different things?
I think for me, often when I see people now that have left and they've been gone for a couple of months, we've got this standing joke, they've had the Fairfax facelift because they've left and they look fantastic.
What was that term? Fairfax facelift?
Fairfax facelift. And the thing that I've the thing that probably, I'm sorry, I've lost the question.
Oh, just about being less stressed after leaving.
Yeah, I don't think I'm any less stressed at all, frankly. Running your own business and running two businesses is extremely hard. And I think there are ups and downs, but having your own business or being a freelance journalist, you can turn around and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go and have lunch with that girl over there today. So you do have that freedom that otherwise you couldn't leave the newsroom. So there is that kind of feeling, but I reckon I'm still pretty stressed.
I think initially, but the stresses are different. You don't have the adrenaline thing going to the same extent, but either you can still have a heap of work to do, but it's more I've got to meet deadline and I'm working for myself, so you've always got to get it right. There's no boss to say, oh, she's had a bad week. Every day is important to get right. So, but I don't think it's the same sort of stress, and certainly I've had lots of people say, you look younger as a result of leaving, but there is a certain level of being on at all times, especially as a writing journalist doing a beat, that yes, you can read the paper and not think, damn, I didn't get that story, or I would have done that differently, or that's not true, or whatever else it might be. So that part has gone.
Phil, coming off a daily program, were you less stressed or just living an unstructured life that drove you nuts?
No, it was that was certainly less stress, and I was doing every Friday something on News Breakfast and TV, and it was hi, Erin's up the back there is the EP.
I think I saw your first post-match appearance.
In fact, that's how I got the gig at La Trobe, because Michael very nicely asked me, he said, "You're looking very happy," because knowing it was my last 3 o'clock start ever. And I said, yes, I'm leaving the ABC, and then you called me that day because you saw it. So thank you, Michael, for that. I actually think the stress reduced more when I actually stopped doing News Breakfast, not being at the ABC anymore. So that was a couple of months later. So I didn't have to think about getting up on Friday mornings, and, the performance wasn't there. But then when I started lecturing, the performance, which I'd forgotten all about, the feeling of the build-up that you have, as anybody who's ever broadcasted or ever done any acting or anything, the build-up that happens to you across the whole day, that was extraordinary. It was just came up lecturing to 140 19-year-olds. It was like such the build-up. I thought, I've forgotten what this is like, this adrenalised thing, where it doesn't make any sense except just preparing your body for it. That was interesting, and that I have sometimes, like especially when I have to meet the head of the department. Sometimes that old build-up comes up, but no, I'm feeling pretty cool.
You mentioned Campbell before, and Louise, you were talking about colleagues, and I know you've actually hired a number of your former colleagues. How important is the network after you've left the big media gig?
Oh, look, I think it's hugely important, especially And if you come from newspapers, and I think TV's still exactly the same, you've been there a long time and you're actually part of a family. And I was sort of part of a News Limited family and a Fairfax family, so I had a big family. And I think it's really important because you do help each other. You do find that you hear that someone's out of work and they haven't had much luck, and you think, oh, I could use them for that, and we do try and look out for each other as much as we can. And, it's certainly my more recent work is at Fairfax, so I have a lot more to do with Fairfax people, but, I've hired people that I worked with News Limited 20 years ago who I know that have taken a redundancy, so to do some work for us. So I think it's hugely important, and they're people that have made contact with me or I've made contact with them. The Melbourne Press Club is a great networking forum as well. So, you just make sure that everyone knows what you're doing as a person that is now out of work or looking for freelance or even has an idea and comes to talk to, anyone about it to bounce the ideas off, because a lot of journalists have got fantastic ideas and some have come to us, and there's some things that we might workshop that might actually become great things. So I think the network is hugely important, but I think it sort of comes naturally when you've been in a big media organisation for a long time as well.
I think that maxim too, that you're told when you start in the media, be careful how you speak to people from rival organisations because you're going to end up working with them in some form.
Oh yeah,
that kind
I
of
agree
stays
with that
true
one.
afterwards as well. What about networking? You've come from, I think it was the Sydney Morning Herald rather than the Age. It's got this group called the Fallen Angels, which is an active networking group post redundancy. Is there much of that for people who worked at the Age?
One.
Oh, you're on that.
Thank you. I don't know one that has a name, but there's a lot of informal meetings that go on all the time. So I catch up with a lot of former colleagues and current colleagues, but half of it is, well, no, actually probably 90% of it is, hello, how are you, let's have a drink, as opposed to what work have you got for me or have I got for you. And part of it is that just debrief thing that goes on. What are you doing now and how did you find X and what do you think of Y and have you heard about that job over there? But that said, probably half of my work comes from people I've met over the years, mainly in journalism, and the other half I'd get from either just keeping my ears out or cold calling, whatever it might be. So the networks, it's not just about finding work, it's about sort of dissecting where you're at, and if you're working for yourself or working in small groups, it's quite good to get people whose opinions you respect to be able to toss around ideas and, think of new ones. And that's probably the part that I miss about working in a large organisation, is that there are some things that don't make sense until you say them out loud to someone else.
Yeah.
Or make too much sense until you say them to someone else and then they don't. So but networks are kind of a prosaic word. A lot of it's friendship, and then there's a lot of practical aspects to it as well.
Do you want to say something about networks?
No. What was the question?
Just about how important is the network been?
Yeah, the network.
You,
We've had a Facebook page called RA Alumni, and from that, looking at that, you get a sense that there are some people who really need to be in contact with other people. So important, because there are single people who have been doing nothing but this job for 25 years, 30 years, and they're going back to their homes without their family. You're losing a family, and just to keep on top of what they're doing and just react to what they're doing and just to have that little bit of banter on Facebook has been a really good thing for some people, a really important thing. And, the "Are you okay" thing I did to Campbell, that's what we have been doing constantly to each other since. It's only been 6 months, 7 months or so since we split up. But even so, we need to do that just to look after each other in the first instance. Then after that,
you're using the language of a broken relationship there.
Yeah, well,
so.
that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Are we able to open up for questions to the room? So, will a microphone find you if you put your hand up? If anyone wants to ask questions or join in the conversation. I think, you know, for a lot of people... Oh, we've got a question up the back? Okay, great.
Yeah,
Colleen.
Hi, this is for you, Laurie. What was the sort of breakdown of people choosing jobs that were entrepreneurial or going straight into work for politicians or new journalism jobs?
It's varied in the two surveys, but the way we look, I think from the pilot, it was about 28% of people went from full-time journalism jobs to full-time journalism jobs. And I think from the survey we did last year, and we're still going through the figures because I'll explain why in a sec, but it's a little bit lower. It's about 21, 22%. But more people who left in 2012 are going into journalism jobs than people who left in 2014. And although we don't have a huge cohort of 2014 people who became redundant, it's clear that the demographics of the group are changing because, to put this in context, when we did the pilot, the average age of of our respondents was 49. The average time they've been in the media was 25 years, and nearly all of them, a very, very high percentage, were in senior roles. And a lot of them have, quite a lot of them actually retired, or very few are actually looking for any kind of, you know, we're totally out of work and looking for work. The demographics changing as younger people are becoming redundant now, and the process is starting to change a bit. In terms of where people went, the really tricky thing to work through is what people describe as the work is not necessarily what you would describe what they're doing. So that means, and also a lot of people are doing a mix of things. So they're doing some journalism work, but also some PR or some consulting work and some media management. And so, in fact, you know, this is, of course, more broadly reflects what's happening in the media generally now for people who've got full-time work. That said, I think the biggest profession, if you like, that people went to is PR, or they're going to. And a lot of people are going into public relations for large organisations, for universities, for politicians. And so that is a big area, which probably the largest single profession that journalists go into, if you like. But the range is really striking, and you know, one journalist became a real estate agent, another's working for a church, doing media relations for a church. You know, one had her first day, you know, as in her new job as a cleaner, and now she runs a bar. And so, what's really interesting is I think some people are either because they run out of options, and if you're in regional Australia, the career options are much more limited than if you're in the cities. But some are just discovering they want to do something completely different, and journalists often have pent-up enthusiasms that they want to, you know, express or develop. And a lot of people are using their redundancy package to actually try to reskill in something completely different as well.
Laurie, there's probably no sort of scientific measure of this in terms of the people
Yeah.
you've been talking to, but to what extent do you think across the board in terms of people you've been talking to as part of this project, people feel better off, worse off in their circumstances today than...
Oh, it's such a great question. Well-being I've discovered in university research circles is a very interesting concept, if you like. But I think, so we're just at the start of the process of trying to, we've had one wellbeing question, but it was open-ended, and we didn't use the Ricketts scale of 1 to 9. We're going to start putting something like that in as well. I was really worried that journalists would react quite cynically to being asked a question like that. But when we asked an open-ended question, we got such a range of stuff. And overall, people's well-being is better, I think, in a general sense. But I'm really struck by, it depends where the people are in terms of proximity to the time they were made redundant in one side, and also just whether they feel that this is an opportunity or or a tragedy. For some people, it's a bit of both. But it's so funny when journalists ask me about the project because, of course, you know, you want to kind of have the line, if you like, and that's what you do in journalism quite often. But in fact, actually looking at these are journalists' lives, and I'm reading the responses, and I don't know whose response I'm reading or anything like that, because we separate all that material out, but you're thinking, well, actually, to do justice to this, you've really got to say, you know, there's just such a gamut of experience there. But we are tracking wellbeing over time, and I think that that's actually going to become a more interesting part of the survey as we go 3 and 4 years down the track, when you can factor out the immediate, you know, either catharsis or you know, challenges associated with the process itself. And people are reflecting a lot more now on how they see journalism now as a part of their life, but that's led them on to other things. But they're not necessarily perhaps as weighed down by the specific circumstances 2 years on, which is, you know, the time lag we had for the last survey. All right. Yeah. I'll just follow where the microphone goes, so yeah. Another one's coming.
Now? More a comment than a question.
Yeah.
It's something Louise said about when she took redundancy, she was able to, apart from getting the kids off to school on time, say, I'm going to have lunch today with this girlfriend. And I turned to David and I said, hey, in the good old days, we did that anyway.
Yeah.
We called it research.
Didn't happen in my day.
Yeah, I think lunch it's the demise of lunch is one of the great tragedies of our time. So, and it's happening everywhere. It's happened at universities too. Our staff club got shut down. So there you go. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Thank you, Laurie. Jim Clark. Your survey and your research, I think, is interesting and it gives a valuable insight. But when it's all done, what's going to happen? It sort of seems to be valuable, but what's the next phase? Is there a life after for this data? Is it going to help or change?
Well, I think you can't, you know, I don't want to try to make too many claims about what it can and can't do. We got in touch. I mean, I think it's feeding it into the other data that's around about job and career change. I was sitting a few weeks ago reading responses, and one of the we didn't ask anyone about age, if they thought age was a factor in what would happen to them after redundancy in their last survey. But I just kept reading in responses to a whole range of open-ended questions. I'm over 50 and I just can't get in the door there. And we, straight away when I heard on the radio while I was reading this about Susan Ryan's inquiry, just made contact and sent them the findings from our pilot and said, you know, we'd like to keep in touch with you. And I guess for us, I think just chronicling what happens and observing this over a period of time, because no one's done this before with anywhere in the world, that in itself, I think, will be valuable. I think the sharing of the experiences is valuable in itself. Of course, we're not going to get people their jobs back, and we're not probably going to persuade larger media companies to change their strategies when it comes to, you know, downsizing. So, but I would like to think that, you know, what this project will end up achieving is firstly to be a record of what happened, and secondly to be part of the debate about work and what happens to people in professions which they've trained and they've become really great at what they do. And this is not just journalism, when suddenly they're not required anymore. And how does this align with a policy that we're all meant to work longer and longer until we're nearly 70? So I think that in that sense, doing the grunt work on this is really important. And I think for the National Library Project to have a record of the individuals, and I guess for an academic project, we're unusually focused on the stories of individuals. I guess that's what I've taken out of journalism and out of making documentaries, that this is important. So that's what I hope for it myself, and I'm hoping that will in itself be of some value to some people.
Could it help for the way that people are made redundant? Would organisations be able to get something from it so that the way that they actually assist people into redundancy could be made
Absolutely,
better?
and we're going to talk a lot about that in some of the sub-themes some of the themes we're exploring about how should organisations look at this. And one of my colleagues in the project, his specialty is not journalism, it's sociology of work. And so that's absolutely where we want to go, and we want to connect up with the mechanics of downsizing and of restructures and how that should be done. And I should say that it's really interesting reading responses again that while a lot of people were pissed off with whatever organisation they worked for, it seemed to make an enormous difference who the line manager was that was managing the redundancy process. So the best and the worst experiences were shared, if you like, by the different big companies. It wasn't as if one company always, did this very poorly and another did it well. So I think we want to shed light on that process as well, and to engage people in the discussion about what's happened and what the aftermath of it is. I think it being longitudinal will help. And in the meantime, we're trying to, through the website, actually give people an opportunity to engage with the project on a whole lot of different levels, one of which I'll talk about before we wrap up today. Yep.
Just one question in relation to the findings and also for the panel. Have you asked the question in terms of how people saw the responsibility for career management? Did they see that as something that the organisation in effect owed them versus taking that responsibility?
No, we're asking a lot about training. We're asking about the role of the MEAA and membership of the MEAA, they are research partners, but we're asking questions that ask people to talk about their experience of that, but also about what training people have received, whether the kind of help they got from the organisation from which they became redundant, and any other training they've undertaken since. And that's going to be quite a big part of the study over time as well.
But career management, are you talking about? That is right. It is such an important thing that, we have our own responsibility for this. It's not the organisation that does it. When I started at the ABC, there were, and Michael would remember some of these people, some of the editors, sub-editors who would be sitting at the desk with a six-pack, and they'd be very grumpy. And that's what they had done for 30 years, and that's probably what they did until they left. There was no career management. It's just a job. And they weren't thinking where they were going to go next. But fortunately, the ABC did give you plenty of opportunities if you just opened your eyes and saw where they were, So you could. You had to do your own career management, as both of you have, huh? Yeah,
well, they offered I can't remember what it was called, but you had 3 months or something with an advised outplacement. Yeah, how to get your CV into shape, what to do in a job interview, things like that, which I went to a couple. It was useful in terms of CVs for me and what people might expect in a job interview. But I do think it's very much on you to work out what it's going to be, because they can't tell you they can point to what you've been good at according to your CV. But if you make really great peanut butter, then it's not going to be anywhere but in your head, and maybe a couple of mates know about it. So yeah, I'm all for taking control as quickly as possible.
We did have, by the way, in some responses, people did tell us quite a lot. And, one person in particular who was very senior in their paper said, this was just I was just totally unprepared for the world that awaited me. I can't even attach a PDF file, or I couldn't when I left. So that idea that being in a paper where all these processes were more or less taken care of, and if you were a section editor, you didn't need to worry about that kind of stuff. And those sort of observations are really telling, I think, of how difficult a lot of people have found it to, even just write a CV and be able to tell their story to prospective employers. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, was in your research, Laurie, with the 2012 people, was there a time pattern or a time period where individuals, were they going after 18 months? How long did it take people to sort of work out where they wanted to go?
That's why it's a longitudinal study, because that is unravelling. And unfortunately, the pilot, we kind of pressed the reset button on the survey after the pilot. So we know that there are people who've done both the pilot and the 2014 one, but the survey we did last year, we're using the same group now for the next 4 years. And that is absolutely one of the key questions. And I think what I mentioned before about the unreliability of the snapshot, that I think that, but we're asking all this stuff now, but over time we want to see how this unravels in the careers of the people affected. And I think that's, really what, it's the privilege of being able to do this as a research project over a longer period of time, is that you can tackle those questions systematically over a longer period, because I think that's where you'll get the more interesting answers. I mean, we're going to be publishing findings all the way through. We're not waiting till the very end of it all, but I think that's an ongoing question that will take time to unravel. We just got a few more minutes, if anyone's got any other questions.
Hi, look, my name's Daniel Fox. I'm the Deputy Sports Editor at MX for another 6 editions until the paper's closed down. So I'm actually going through all this at the moment, so it's a very interesting discussion for me. My preference is to take a redundancy at this stage.
Sorry, I didn't hear, just say that again, I didn't hear you.
My preference at the moment is to try to do something new. Because there's a lot of, my girlfriend is in medical research and is looking at jobs overseas that would be in wonderful tropical places with bizarre diseases and good surf. But one thing I'm conscious of or slightly worried about is that while at the moment I think I might be able to find another job in journalism, after 6 months, I wonder how true that would be. So I'm curious to know whether there were many people who spent any time away from newspapers and then came back to it, or other forms of journalism.
Again, it's probably a little bit early to tell in a broad sense, but I'm just sort of thinking again of the responses I've read, where I know there've been a number of people who've decided I'm going to take a break from this and not even think about it for a while, and then have got journalism jobs. And in a couple of cases I'm thinking of, and again I couldn't say, and I don't know who they were, but it was being rung up by former colleagues. So I think that I get the point you make, that a lot of people have this anxiety about the skill base they've had will become less and less relevant. But that's not always seeming to be the case at all. I think, a lot of people are saying their outlook, they didn't know enough about, didn't know how to do X, Y, and Z, but their outlook and their willingness to learn got them into something quite new and quite different. And so I think that's, that's a really, that's a really interesting strand to that we'll continue to look at. But I should just mention, we've set up on the blog a section called My New Beat, where we've invited people, including everyone in this room, by the way, to share, in a couple of hundred words, share their experiences of the projects they've gone on to do after redundancy, whether they're in journalism or in another area. And someone whose profile went up the other day, Wendy Hargraves, who used to be mostly in print, she was saying to me that she's actually learned a lot about doing stuff on TV and actually expanding the range of things she can do in the media, and apart from setting up her own franchise, 5 of the Best, and learning to operate a business. So I think while there's certainly an anxiety about, will the skills gap grow and grow if I'm not there? Will I not be able to use the latest, data journalism software or whatever? That I think it's more of an outlook question, it would seem at the moment, but very interesting thing to track, because of course when larger companies are hiring, they are looking for people who've come out and can use the latest versions of universities and can use latest versions of software. So it'll be a very interesting issue to watch.
Can I just say one thing that I think has really changed in the last probably 4 to 5 years is that journalists become more their own brand rather than working for the brand. And it's not so important for them to be Louise Graham from The Age. It could be Louise Graham, who's a legal expert and can write anything in the legal field. So there's a lot of people who are specialising or making, because setting up your own website, all those sort of things are so easy to publicise yourself, and then if you follow up with networking, I'm finding that there is some fine young journalists out there at the moment who are doing exactly that, and they're working for The Guardian, and they're working for The Age, and they're working for a number of different organisations. But then the next problem arises, which is more about pricing and the value of journalism, and we've seen a big devalue in journalism in the last probably 5 years anyway, and where people are expecting things for 17 cents a word, and people are doing things for 17 cents a word. And that's where, within, we're degrading the journalism that we've got. And that's the thing that I find really frustrating, that there are so many people, supply and demand, there's so many people out there, so many people desperate to make a buck, that they are devaluing what they do and who they do it for. And, I've met students and young journalists who have worked for major media organisations for months on end for nothing, and which incenses me, because to me, one, it's illegal, and two, some of them pass it off as an internship, but it's a very long one. But the other thing is what they do, as soon as that person asks for money, they say, okay, we've had enough of you, next one come in. And there's a lot of that going on, and I think that journalists really have to steel themselves and be more strong about how they price themselves and what their value is, because the whole field is being degenerated by what people are expecting to pay at the moment, which makes a lot of people angry.
And I think one of the really interesting questions we're going to look at over time is what are the incomes of people who stay in journalism jobs from our group, and are they not as good, or are they on a par with people who move into other areas? It would seem self-evident that in PR you're likely to get more than in journalism, but we really want to kind of investigate this properly over time, because we hear so many stories in our surveys from people saying, I'm a professional person, I'm not a hobbyist, and I don't expect to work for 15 cents a word. And that is obviously one of the really big challenges for people who are trying to fashion freelance careers, who may actually be very well connected and very good at finding editors who want to run their work, but not know what to do when they're confronted with something that's maybe 10% of what they really should be getting, or 20% of what they should be getting per word for the sort of work that they're doing. Do we have time for one more question, or someone's got their hand up at the back? One quick one, yeah, okay. And the microphone is coming to you.
Sorry. I'm Barbara Booth. I'm an ex-freelancer. Having heard about Media Extra, is it, and the other media gang, what are you doing? Do you work in with the MEAA, and what is the MEAA actually doing to help freelancers? Or are you working together to do this, or what? Has it improved?
Just directed
I think
towards
that
me,
was
I
to
couldn't
you,
hear that.
to Louise, yeah?
So you're asking me if we work in with the MEAA?
Yes, and whether things have improved as far as helping freelancers go.
Look, when I started out, I basically went to the MEAA site and got their rates and what their casual rates were, what their word rates were, and worked by those. I wouldn't say that I had any engagement with the MEAA, except they wanted, once I started employing a few more people, they wanted me to have an award, which was a bit ridiculous because I didn't really employ that many. So I haven't really had much engagement with them, but I do respect certain rates. I think some of their rates are overinflated. So, I mean, you know, there's sort of $900 a day or something for freelance journalists and those sort of things. I mean, that's impractical. But you know, I certainly would never ever pay anyone 10 cents a word or 17 cents a word. I mean, across both the businesses I work in, the least we would pay would be 50 cents a word. If a job requires anything less, we let it go. I mean, I've had people come to me who want, you know, in photography, who want a studio shoot, black and white colour, 10 headshots, corporate for their website, and they want to pay $150. And I just go somewhere else. You know, don't need that sort of business. So, but that's a struggle. We're finding that a bigger and bigger struggle. The competition out there is very, very tough, and people who are willing to work for nothing and work for very little are our biggest competition.
All right, we've unfortunately run out of time, but I do want to thank the panellists today, Louise, Kirsty and Phil, for being part of this, and to thank the Melbourne Press Club hugely for putting this lunch on today. And I'm going to hand the baton back to the man who's been having a more relaxed lunch than he would normally have here, Michael Rowland.
Yes, thank you, Laurie. Thank you very much to all the panel as well. It's been fantastic. Thank you, Laurie. A round of applause for Laurie. I think it's been a fantastic event.
Thanks.
And he's not joking about that website. It's newbeatsblog.com. Is that
newbeatsblog.com. And you might be able to see up there a slide at the moment of
Wendy
Hargraves
Yep.
and My New Beat. So if anyone here would like to be part of this particular section, Veronica Ridge, formerly from The Age, and her Isimo magazine is also up there. You can just go to the blog and the instructions are there. And we have another slide which we might be able to flick up for a second. Mandy Crane, who's been working with us, who's sitting over there in the blue, she's just been working a little bit with us on the blog to draw up a redundancy timeline, and there's a slideshow that goes with it. And this is really just our first iteration of trying to put the announcements as they've been unravelling in the media of job losses into a format where you can look at them sequentially. You know, we're calling out for assistance here because this is just a start and we want to build this in the coming months. So again, if you're on the blog and you see this and you think of anything you want to add to it, drop us a line and we'll include it in our next iteration.
That's great. Can you come back and host all the other Press Club lunches too? You did a fantastic job.
Thanks so much.
Thanks again, guys, and have a fantastic day.